Hi, my name is Peter, and in this short video I will guide you through the process of updating the BENCHLAB firmware. In our BENCHLAB 04 news post, we mentioned that the new PCB comes with a new firmware, version 2. While version 2 doesn't introduce any new features, it does fix a bug where the fans wouldn't activate in certain situations. Since the firmware is backwards compatible, it's pretty easy for BENCHLAB 03 owners to also upgrade to this new firmware. Before we begin, make sure to download the following files. You can download the latest BENCHLAB firmware from our GitHub repository. Since BENCHLAB uses an STM32F303 microcontroller, we can use the official STM32Cube programmer software to flash the firmware. Note that you'll need to either create an account or provide your email address to download the software from the official website. When we have the two files on our drive, we are ready to begin the firmware update process. The first step is to verify the current firmware version using the BENCHLAB software. We can easily check the version in the Status tab. If you have a BENCHLAB 03, then likely you'll find firmware version 1. The second step is to prepare the device for the firmware upgrade. First, disconnect all the power from the BENCHLAB PCB, then locate the jumper near the ARGB1 connector and move it to the debug position. Then connect the BENCHLAB to your computer using the USB Type-C cable. If your BENCHLAB is in debug mode, the RGB will not turn on when we connect the USB Type-C power. Do note that this check only works if the RGB switch is in play mode. Now open the STM32Cube programmer. The software should automatically detect the BENCHLAB if it's the only USB device connected and the BENCHLAB is in debug mode. Before we flash the new firmware, we should also back up the current firmware. To do so, click the Read drop-down menu and select Save As to save a copy of the existing firmware. Now let's flash the new firmware. Go to the Erasing and Programming tab. Then click Full Chip Erase to remove the old firmware. This is a crucial step in the process, as without first erasing the chip, we won't be able to flash the new firmware. Next, browse to the downloaded firmware v2 and click Start Programming. This initiates the firmware flashing process. The device will disconnect upon successful completion. As a final step of the process, it's important to verify whether the firmware flashing was successful. So again, disconnect all the power from the BENCHLAB, move the jumper back to its original position, then reconnect the device. The RGB light should now turn on if the switch is in play mode. Open the BENCHLAB software again and check the firmware version. It should now display version 2. Congratulations, you've successfully upgraded your BENCHLAB firmware. This process should also apply to future firmware updates. If you have any questions or encounter any issues during the upgrade process, feel free to contact us for any assistance.